So welcome everyone to the first of, I think, 5 courses we're doing. The goal of these is, I know some of you might have attended the 8-bit course we did back in, gosh, was that January or February or something like that? We realized that we covered a ton of information and it was probably too much, but so this is kind of going to be a refresher to what we did before, but also it's hopefully a little bit more of a manageable chunk. We're hoping to do a few more of these about once per month, covering the different groups, and then fingers crossed, Delta subsides a little bit and we'll be able to do an in-person one at some point under the microscope, like at SLU with microscopes and specimens, because there's just nothing like actually getting to see a bee in 3D that's not moving. So today we're going to get started with bumblebees. We are, I guess, fortunate in the St. Louis metro that our bumblebees are pretty easy in the scheme of things. This is also probably the course that is least applicable as you get out of St. Louis, whereas all the other courses are a little bit more generalizable to other locations. So do keep that in mind. We have pretty simple bumblebees here, but even as you get into, northern Illinois, the bumblebees start to really change. Get pretty much if you go any direction, the bumblebees are going to start to change. But here in St. Louis, we have a lot of diversity in a lot of bees, but our bumblebee diversity is not that high.
Yeah, it's actually probably pretty decent for Illinois and, some of the lower Midwest kind of states. But after that, we start to lose it. So it's definitely a localized version.
Okay, and with that, we'll kind of get started. Okay, so some of the goals today are just to learn to distinguish focal bombus. So we're going to probably use the term bombus a lot, which is the scientific term. In general, we're going to use the scientific terms because the there are common names for the bumblebees, but there's not common names for a lot of the other bees, and also the common names can get kind of confusing. So we're going to try to stick to the scientific names today. So we're going to learn to distinguish the focal bumblebees found in St. Louis, and then identify bees using a decision tree. Okay, so just some basic taxonomy, anatomy to get us going today. So just basic, you have your head, which is kind of the head, the thorax, which is the center section, and then the abdomen. There is this kind of delineation. With the bumblebees, it's almost kind of hard to tell sometimes where the head and thorax separate. It's easier on other species because they're less hairy. And then the abdomen is going to be the end section. Okay, some other terminology. So all insects have 3 pairs of legs that are attached to the thorax. For bumblebees, the big way we identify them is based on the coloration pattern on their abdomen. And so they have these sections of their abdomen, which are called tergites, but everyone just abbreviates it to T. So if you hear saying T1, T2, T3, that's going to be, you're going to start at the tergite closest to the thorax and then work your way down. Females have 6 tergites, males have 7, but we're mostly going to be focusing on the females today. And actually mostly just focusing on T1 and T2 are the biggest ones. And
one little hint here that I'll prime you for later too. Sometimes it looks really simple here, the way that it is drawn, but depending on the angle of the bee, it can be kind of hard to see if you're looking actually at tergite 1 or 2. And so tergite 2 on bumblebees is significantly thicker than any of the other tergites. So that often helps. Tergite 6 kind of gets lost, or 7 in the males kind of gets lost sometimes. It's kind of cool. Their tergites are like accordions, not quite accordions, but they overlap with each other. And so they can kind of expand or contract them. So just be aware that it's not always going to look like the perfect, 6 tergites in a row. But that T2 is usually larger. So that helps you, say, okay, that one is T2, and you can kind of go from there.
Okay, and lastly, the last thing is that bumblebees, and actually honeybees are the other ones that do it. The females collect pollen in this thing called a pollen basket. They essentially stick all the pollen together on this kind of like shovelly, it almost looks like a little shovel section, spade section of their leg. So this is one way to tell the females from the males, is this is the same species. These are both Bombus greciacalis, but the females have this really thick leg section right here where they stick all the pollen, whereas the males don't.
The light, go ahead.
Yeah, go for it.
The light will look different too, because on the females, that pollen basket is concave, and on the males, it's convex. So it often looks really dark and shiny on the females, and then on the males, you can see how the light is reflecting right here, and there's actually more hair on that leg too. So when you have a closer look, you can see it better.
And how this looks when it has pollen on it is it's going to just be this like jelly bean like thing stuck to the female's leg. The color can vary from kind of like yellow to this brownish color. You'll even find white and orange and purple and some weird funky colors depending on what the bee's visiting.
Sometimes they're striped because they'll switch what they're foraging for. So they'll focus on one thing for a while. They'll get that color a lot. I saw one bee one time that went from like orange to purple. It was really cool. It's not usually that dramatic and cool, but when it is, you notice it. And it's like, so the way that it works, the hair on the outside of the female's corbiculae, it kind of acts like a, I would say a comb, but I mean like the comb that people use to put their hair up in a bun kind of a thing, you know, kind of comes around and hooks in. And then there are these other hairs at the base of the corbiculae that are like combs that pack the pollen together. So they take a little bit of nectar, they put the pollen up through all those combs, and it packs it together like kind of like a jelly bean. It's like a protein packed, I don't know, treat. Candy.
All right, so the reason we're focusing, I'm actually going to say we're focusing on workers today. So bumblebees have colonies, so they have a queen, and then they have workers, which are all female, and then they have males. We're really going to focus on the females today. However, though a lot of the males do look similar, they might, it gets a little tricky because like the males often have like different colored hair on the back of their head. But when you're looking at the abdomen, the coloration is going to be the same, with the exception of Bombus pennsylvanicus, which we're actually going to cover today, and Bombus bimaculatus, which has some weird color variation sometimes in the male. But just do be warned that the hair color on the back of the head does differ a little bit on some of the males. We hope to expand and kind of cover the males at some point as well. So, but just keep that in mind. And yeah, the queens are pretty rare overall, but you will find them out and about, but they can appear a little bit different as well.
This key works pretty well for them though. So it should work pretty well. Around here, they don't vary too much. Some other species, it can vary quite a bit more.
So just keep that in mind that we're mostly focusing on the females. Okay. So with that, what is a bumblebee? A bumblebee is going to be, you know, some black and yellow hairy individual. They vary a ton in size, from smaller than a honeybee to, you know, as large as a carpenter bee, you know, half an inch long. Size is not a good differentiator for bumblebees at all. You know, with it, just, yeah, they just vary a ton. They're gonna have some mix of yellow and black on their thorax, and then their abdomen as well. And then the females have these pollen baskets. So that's generally what a bumblebee is. Hopefully you all are used to seeing them in your yard. As a group, they're very common, but individual species, definitely some are rarer than others. Okay, so some of you have seen this key before. I'm going to let Nicole actually talk about it, just kind of how to look at a key and how to distinguish bumblebees to start from other bees.
Yeah, so this is based off of the key that we will use during the next meeting, the next training where we start talking about all the major bee groups. But we wanted to start with bumblebees because they're relatively straightforward, but they're also really common, especially this time of year. And you'll notice later we'll talk about a couple males that sort of throw people for a loop this time of year. So thought we'd start there. But this key works you through how to tell a bumblebee apart from other bees, because there are some bees that can look quite a bit like bumblebees, especially if you're seeing them while they're flying around you and moving. So the biggest way to differentiate a bumblebee from, or the easiest way from other bees, is that pollen basket. Only bumblebees and honeybees have it. So if you see a big pollen basket like that, or something that looks like this, then that is a bumblebee, as long as they are also sort of dark and relatively hairy. Carpenter bees, which are commonly mistaken for bumblebees, have almost no hair on the T2 through 6 of their abdomen. They do have yellow hair on the T1, and they will have a smattering of black hair elsewhere. But for the most part, they are quite shiny and much less hairy, and they don't have that corbicula. These other two species, the hibiscus bee and the hairy flower bee, Tylotrix and Anthophora, neither one of those ones, they tend to be smaller, but of course some bumblebee workers can be the same size or smaller. And so it's a little bit hard to tell here because we're not zoomed in, but this hair on here, on this leg here, is pretty long and all over that hind leg. So it doesn't have the shiny hairless part that the female bumblebees have. But otherwise, I've caught one of these before when I was catching bumblebees and been very confused for a second as I tried to identify it until I looked at the legs and was like, yes, no, that is not a bumblebee. So keep an eye out for that. Anthophora and Tylotrix. So, well, the hibiscus bee is commonly found in hibiscus. So that is a helpful in terms of determining what that species is. And Anthophora is often not as abundant as bumblebees are. So that gives you a little bit more information for how this fits into other bees that might look kind of similar. But I think a lot of us are probably pretty comfortable with bumblebees as a group, because they're one of the more well-known groups.
Yeah, and we'll cover the specifics of these later. I will say feel free to ask questions, but
Yeah.
we're going to skip this for now because this is just kind of a teaser for later classes.
Yeah.
Okay, but in general, we're going to be focusing on this key that you should have gotten in your email. While we're talking about it, it'd be great if you can like kind of pull it up and maybe have it on another screen or have it printed out or something. But do you want to explain generally how you go through one?
Yes. So one of the things that we want you all to do is really practice using the keys, because it's easy for us to have knee-jerk reactions to what we think we see. But until you've really started looking at the multiple traits, and until you start really getting more knowledgeable about which traits tell you which species you have, it's easy to guess wrong. And again, in the bumblebees, we don't have too many in this area, so we should be able to get through it pretty quickly. But we do want you, as we're going through this, to have this key up and to go through the branching points. So in this case, one of the first things that we will have you look at is the thorax, because the thorax can vary in terms of where the yellow hair is. So this group that we're looking at right here has mostly yellow hair and a small black dot, and that black dot is really actually a hairless spot. There might be a smattering of black hairs in there, but mostly or most commonly it's a lack of hair there. And then what we call the integument, which is sort of like the skin of the bee, is black. So that's what you're seeing. And then the other group will have a band of black right across from the wing bases. And sometimes that black will also come down right here. So it won't necessarily look like a band. It'll look like half of it is black and half of it is yellow. So that's the first step that we'll ask you to walk through. And then from there, it'll ask you probably to go into your T1, T2, T3 patterning. Okay. Now, one thing I do want to note, this key caused some people a little bit of confusion last time because we have this connecting point right here. This is not meant to be a loop to send you back to this decision point here. If you get here and you have a 2-lobed yellow pattern, you have Bombus bimaculatus. So you can go straight to Bombus bimaculatus. If, however, you have an arch here in the two T2, then that could be either Bombus bimaculatus or Grisiacolis. The way that you tell them apart is by the color on the top of the head, of the hair on the top of the head. So just so you know, and we are going to go through lots of examples. We're going to try to spend more time going through examples than us talking, although we've already talked now for 18 minutes. So we should probably get going here. But I just wanted you to be aware that that branching point towards the end is actually sending you to bimaculatus or to Grisiacolis.
Okay. And yeah, we'll have a lot of time to practice this. That's just going through the key. Okay, so I'm going to walk us through these pretty quickly just so we have more time to practice. But these are all the species we're going to cover today. So first, we're going to start with Bombus impatiens. This is maybe the simplest bumblebee. It's also very common, especially right now. Bombus impatiens has yellow on T1 and it is otherwise black. The thorax, on the hair on the thorax is variable, especially as they start to get older, but kind of fresh ones will have pretty much all black and then it will kind of look like a slit. So that's a really good giveaway.
And you all yellow.
Yeah. And then there's yellow hair on the back of the head. But you can notice, just as a quick hint, it kind of looks like it might be 2 spots on T1, but you can see they go all the way the length of the body. So this is actually not a 2-spotted, and this is on T1. So this is on the first tergite.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, the black that you're seeing is actually the underside or the top of tergite 1. So that's actually part of tergite 1. It's the part that's usually hidden. So the thorax and the abdomen connect by a hinge that opens and closes like this. So that's another thing that throws people off sometimes, particularly when you're looking at photographs.
Okay, and that's kind of to distinguish from Bombus bimaculatus. You can kind of see the same lobed pattern here on T1 as we just saw on Bombus impatiens. But now we have like a true 2-spot on T2 where it's like these 2 giant spots on the second tergite. And one way to tell these from a side view is that it kind of forms a right angle with the yellow hair on T1. So right here is almost a right angle that the spots form. So you have a right angle of yellow. And they also have yellow on the back of the head. But yeah, this right angle is a really good giveaway. So this is the 2-spotted or bimaculatus bumblebee. These are also pretty common, but they're more in the spring. Okay, now we have Bombus grisiacolis. I will say, just as this is my big thing, all these names are like pretty much made up Latin, which means there's no one right pronunciation. So when we get going, if you have questions, don't worry if you feel like you're pronouncing something wrong. People say grisiacolis, people say grisiacolis. There's a bunch of different ways to pronounce all these, so don't get hung up on the pronunciation. Okay, and to Bombus grisiacolis, there is an arch shape on T2, and it is often brown colored, hence the brown belted bumblebee. Like as you can see on the bee on the right, you can see it's a very brown color to distinguish from the yellow color, which is on T1. The way to distinguish this one sometimes from bimaculatus is you can see that the brown color kind of forms an acute angle, with the body and things like that, as opposed to bimaculatus, which really forms that right angle. The arch also goes all the way across the abdomen. Whereas to go back to the bimaculatus real quick, you can see that it doesn't go all the way across. It's really in the center of the abdomen. So there's black hair on either side.
And that color can vary a lot on that T2, the arch. It can be yellow, it can be brown, it can be rusty colored, it can be anywhere in between. It's a very variable color. So the brown belted is sort of it's not exactly a misnomer because sometimes it does look quite brown, but it doesn't always look brown. This is also the one that people will sometimes think they have Bombus affinis, which is the rusty patched bumblebee, which we did actually historically have here in St. Louis, but it hasn't been seen in a few decades. And just to point out how you would know if that was the case, that would be that T2 where there's black in the corner there will be yellow.
You're jumping ahead. Here's Bombus affinis.
I was transitioning seamlessly is what I was. So yeah, this is, if you were to find this, if you think you find this, you probably haven't. Double, triple check. It'd be amazing if we found affinis. That would be like national news if we were to find it. I mean, maybe not national, but it would be a big deal. It would definitely be local news. So we probably don't have it anymore.
Yeah, so you can see it kind of looks like Graciacolis, but then there's yellow surrounding it as opposed to black. But we're not going to spend a lot of time on this one because once again, we're not going to find it. Oh wait, Bombus fraternus. This is like a kind of exciting Shutterbee story in that this one's pretty rare. It's not federally listed as endangered, but it is on some list, like the IUCN list is a big international list. So this is a kind of rare, somewhat vulnerable bumblebee, and actually quite a few people found it this year during Shutterbee surveys, which was really exciting. So this bumblebee it's just kind of a weird looking bee, I will say. Like it kind of just like I can't really explain it, but like it's pretty elongated. The hair on it is pretty short. It just kind of like looks different.
And hair length and how much variation there is in hair length is something that varies from species to species, and it can be somewhat diagnostic or at least tell you something about it. So I like to think of them as like the short-haired bees that really have consistent length in their hair. They kind of look like tuxedo bees, or like people who just went and got their, all their hair done. You know what I mean? Like everything's everything's the same length. It is perfect and trim and proper. I'm totally anthropomorphizing here, but that's how I connect to it. And fraternus is one of those. The T1 and the T2 are strongly yellow. This is one that gets confused a little bit with two that we'll talk about in a minute. So the big thing is just to double check that it really is the T1 and the T2 and not the T2 and the T3, because we'll show another couple bees that have two stripes of yellow. And I just want to also dovetail a little bit off of what Nina was saying, because one of our collaborators at the Missouri Botanical Gardens, James Baupel, has been searching for fraternus populations and is using some of the populations that have been found in Shutterbee to sort of inform where we think this bee is and why we're finding it, where we're finding it. So pretty cool, exciting work.
But yeah, this one is very rare. So just keep that in mind. Okay. Now we're going to Bombus auricomis. This is another one that some people say ericomis. There's multiple ways to pronounce it. This bee has a black T1 most of the time. So this differs from all the other bees we've talked about so far, where the T1 is yellow. This one, the T1 is usually black. And then T2 and T3 are yellow. Also, this brings us to the bottom half of the key, because you can see that there's black going, all the way across the wing bases. So we no longer have the yellow on either side. It's the black all the way across. The big thing about this one is that it has yellow on the top of the head. And this is going to be one of the few ways to distinguish it from another species that looks really similar to it, is that it has this yellow, it's like these it's like it has parted hair almost, I think of it, because it has these 2 yellow patches and there's actually like a tiny bit of black in between. But yeah, there's yellow on either side of the head. And these are pretty big bees overall as well. Okay, and that distinguishes it from Pennsylvanicus, which looks really similar in that it has T2 and T3 yellow, but this one has black hair on the back of its head. And this is sometimes hard to tell because like you don't have the bright yellow, so it's sometimes like the absence of the absence of hair as opposed to it almost looks like the absence of yellow hair as opposed to the presence of black hair is sometimes how I think about it, because it can be difficult to see. We're also going to talk about this male because this male looks like another bee. The males of Bombus pennsylvanicus are all yellow. They're pretty cool looking bees, but all Ts are going to be yellow, which distinguishes it from Bombus fervidus, which we're not really going to talk about today. But Bombus fervidus looks really similar in that it has T1 through T6 yellow or T5 yellow. But this bee hasn't really, this was like the very, very southern part of its range and hasn't been found here in a really long time. But if you use the iNaturalist like predictive software thing, it often thinks that the Bombus pennsylvanicus males, which are these ones, are Bombus fervidus. But it's in this area, regardless of what side of the metro area you're on, it's most likely just a Bombus pennsylvanicus male and not Bombus fervidus. But they do look really similar, so that's kind of why we include it. It looks like we have some questions.
I've been covering them.
Cool.
Will you go forward just to point out again how we can tell males from females? So, or back, I guess. One of the ways, as we talked about, is whether or not they have the corbiculae, but you can tell from this picture here of the pennsylvanicus male that angle is sort of hard to see the leg. So another way to tell, as Nina mentioned earlier, the thorax is longer. It has an extra tergite. The antennae also tend to be larger. And sometimes the eyes are big. Not always, but sometimes the eyes are like ginormous and you're like, this looks like a bumblebee, but alien or some sort of weird filtered version with the big eyes. So that is another way to tell. The antenna actually have an extra segment on them compared to the females.
Yeah, but especially the Bombus gruciacalis and Bombus bimaculatus, the males have like the huge eyes on it. Yeah. Pretty much I'm like, it's a bumblebee.
Actually, gruciacalis does, bimaculatus does not.
Oh, sorry. I will say with the Bombus gruciacalis, I'm like, you are a bumblebee, but like less cute. When I think of them. They just look weird.
They're cute, they're so hairy.
Going to anthropomorphizing. The males are just less cute than the females.
Oh, whatever. I think they're very cute.
Okay, on that note, we know we just covered a ton of information. Now, yeah.
Really quickly, before we jump into practice, we are keeping track of who was able to show up today, just for our own like programmatic purposes. And we have 2 people that we don't know who you are. So we have one person who is here as Bob. Bob, would you mind telling us your full name?
You can also put it in the
or put it in the chat. That works too. And we have somebody listed as iPhone. If you wouldn't mind putting your name in the chat, that would be fantastic, just so we can keep track of who was able to make it. We'll just do that. Put it in the chat. And Nina, let's move forward.
Cool. Okay, so what we're doing is we're just going to show a series of photos. We have a series of kind of easier ones, and then they get a little bit harder. I'm about to put up, sorry, I need to, where's my little, oh, there it is. Put up a poll to kind of help you just feel like you are, clicking on something. But what we, oops, stop sharing. Let me, oh no, okay, here we go. Sorry, there was an update and everything changed. Okay, we highly recommend, even if you feel like you're comfortable with these, to go through the key when you're doing this. For the first few, maybe we'll start to talk about where it is based on how people are doing. But yeah, we really recommend you use the key when you're doing this This will help you later on when you have a tricky one or just getting comfortable using these keys when we go to groups you're less familiar with. Okay, we're going to stop on this one just to get through it. I realized also I've been answering your questions, but I've been sending them to everyone in the meeting room or in the waiting room. So whoops. Okay, so we got mostly bimaculitis, which is correct. We got a few inpatients, and grucicolus. So the first thing is just to look at the thorax, and we see that there's not a kind of a black stripe all the way across, which would pop us into the top half of the key. And then looking at the abdomen, we see that there's this T2 pattern of the lobed, and you can also see the yellow hair on the top of the head. So even if you kind of thought this was arched, the yellow hair on the top of the head should have brought you to bimaculitis. And this is like pretty much a right angle. It's actually a little obtuse of a right angle, but you can see that there's these, two spots in the center. Okay, we're gonna go to the next one. If anyone has any questions, go for it.
I was going to say the exact same thing. From here on out, we're going to be practicing. So please feel free as you're looking at these. If you have questions or if you want clarification on anything, ask, and we're happy to answer.
It looks like most people are figuring it out, that it's at least the bottom half of the key. So that's a good place to start. Okay. So this one is going to be Bombus fraternus, which some of you got. First, so the bottom half of the key, you can see there's that black going all the way across the thorax. On the abdomen, you can see this is T1 right here, which is yellow. As Nicole was saying, T1 is smaller than T2, and then this is T1, or this is T2 here, which is just really large. So T1 and T2 are yellow and the rest are black. So that would indicate fraternus. Did anyone, we had a lot of Pennsylvanicus. So did anyone have confusion with that and want to, want some help reasoning it out?
Yeah, and auricomus too. We had a few people there. So let's ask that maybe a different way. Anybody who thought they had Pennsylvanicus and auricomus, what do you think tripped you up?
And feel free to unmute yourself.
For me, it was the size of teeth T2. I thought that was more than.
Yeah,
I
so
went to,
the T2 is larger, right, than the T1.
yeah,
But the T1, sometimes you can see it from different angles. So that can be confusing, right? Because sometimes it looks larger. And so on the Pennsylvanicus and Aricomus, that bigger stripe should be the top stripe. And in this case, for Fraternus, that bigger stripe is the lower stripe. And somebody mentioned the black stripe on the T1, and that's not actually, I don't know if you're talking up here or in between the two, but yeah, so this in between part is you're looking at the integument. And actually for both of those, what you're seeing is the hairless part, because the integument is black. So that can be a little confusing, right? And so you will get better at that. You will get better at noticing how much hair it has to be, or how much area has to be black before it's considered a stripe. Those really thin layers are not quite enough. So that T1, another way to tell the T1 is oftentimes the hair is a little bit shorter in the center. And so it makes almost a kind of a curved look. Mina, I don't know if you can use your pointer there. Like the hairs on the edge almost look like shoulder pads.
Mm-hmm.
They poof out a little bit more. And so sometimes that sort of wave shape can help you identify when you have the T1 versus when you have the T2.
What's a good way to define integument? That's just kind of.
Oh, it's like the skin. It's the outer hard part of the bee.
In this case, it's almost like the ridges between the tergites.
Yeah.
The lines between the tergite. Right. So there's one there. And then there's another one there.
And I originally thought, this is Terry, I originally was going to put down Fraternus. And then I said, oh, that's too rare. I didn't figure this is, this is just a picture.
Yeah. Right. Well, we did not randomly choose. I will say we chose examples that run the gambit that you might see. So we didn't choose them based off of how abundant they are. And I'm really glad that people got it confused, because it is confusing when you see them in real life, especially because you're not going to be expecting to see Fraternus. After you really start seeing bees a lot and start trying to identify them, you're going to start seeing Pennsylvanicus and Aricomus, and you're going to go to that. So this is another reason it's important to work through the key to make sure that you're really seeing what you're seeing.
Okay, I'm going to pop to the next one.
Great.
Yeah, people are getting this one.
And again, we will share this PowerPoint with you. And we also have an additional PowerPoint that has other practice individuals. And we highly recommend that after this, you go onto iNaturalist, you go to either Shutterbee or maybe the Bees of Missouri project or any of those other projects, and just start trying to identify. Don't agree with people yet, but you try to learn through iNaturalist, because that's a really great community.
Okay, I'm going to end this here. Most people got this right. This is Bombus greciacalis. So it should put you at the top half of the key, just because there's not a black stripe across. And then here we have a brown colored arch. It looks like, just based on the angle, you can really see the integument here. You can kind of see that hair. You might also be some hair loss, but you can see there's a yellow T1 and then a very brown colored T2. Okay, we're going to pop to this one. And so this one, I won't give it away, but
Stop.
I'm gonna mute myself. Sorry, we didn't do a good job showing the thorax on this one, but maybe that's a hint. Okay, we're not going to spend a ton of time on this one. This is Bombus affinis, which is the rusty patch bumblebee. You can see that it has the brown here and then the yellow underneath. We actually had quite a few people that said Bombus impatiens, and I can kind of see why, because you could think that what you're seeing here is that first T, in which case it could be Bombus affinis or Bombus impatiens, but you got to look up here, and this is actually the first T right here, and then this is the second T. So really make sure you're taking the time to count out those tergites, kind of try to figure out, I always try to figure out like which one is number one and then go from there, because that can really start to throw you.
And the line between the two of them can be subtle, right? So that line, there is a slight little red line or black line there where you can see through the hairs down into the skin of the bee, but it can be kind of challenging to see that. So again, remembering that that T2 is thicker and wider, and that T1 sort of has shoulder pads a little bit. You can see that a little bit there too. So as you look at these more and more and more, you'll get more comfortable with what that looks like. It takes a little bit of practice in terms of identifying the tergites. So you will get there, I promise.
Okay, so in this one, this one's a little different. You're just gonna say which bee is on the left. So this is just looking at the head. I will say, yeah, one is Bombus pennsylvanicus and which one is Bombus auricomis. Which one is on the left? Okay, so you can see on the one on the left here that there is these black hairs that are on the back of the head, whereas on the right there's these yellow hairs on the back of the head. Actually, there's a few black hairs like interspersed, but like overall they are mostly yellow hairs, whereas this one mostly has black hairs. So if you go to the key and down to the bottom part, I already told you one is pennsylvanicus and one is auricomis. We see that pennsylvanicus has the black hair on the back of the head.
And in our region, that's really one of the only ways to reliably identify them. Auricomis tends to have less yellow hair on the T1, but it can sometimes. Pennsylvanicus tends to have more black hair on the back of the thorax, but that can vary. So this is the headshot is really important for these bees because otherwise it's very challenging to tell them apart. And just because many of you may not have seen a close-up shot of a bee's face, as you can tell, the antennae kind of come out from the smack in the middle of the face. And then it has these two large compound eyes on either side of the head. And then it has three smaller eyes on the top that are called the ocelli. So the hair that we're talking about is up kind of like the back of the forehead, all the way above all of those eyes. So they sometimes have, sometimes the coloration of the hair around the base of the antennae the front of the face can be important for identifying bees. But what we're talking about for these ones is that forehead hair is the only way I mean, I guess you could sort of say eyebrows, but there's another species that we use eyebrows for that you'll learn about if you come to our identification keys or our meetings later in the year. So yeah, we're looking for that hair that's all the way up at the top of the head.
Okay. Keep on going here. So this one's a little bit worn, but this will pop you to the top half of the key if you're not there already.
Yeah, the bees can't just take it easy on you, as they age, like with humans, sometimes they lose hair for different reasons than for humans, but it can get worn off. So this one, we're seeing a lot of that skin underneath the hair. Everybody's doing a fantastic job with this one.
So this one we're seeing yellow on T1, and then overall it's black. We're not seeing any lobe, we're not seeing any like two lobes. We're not seeing any arch. So this puts us towards Bombus impatiens. If this was Bombus bimaculatus, which a few people did, we would see like two distinct spots in the center of this T2 here, but T2 is all black. Okay. And just keep on chugging along here, just get a little bit more practice. We only have about 10 more minutes. Looks like it's the age-old battle of Pennsylvanicus versus Auricomus again. These are definitely tricky. But you can kind of see here, so there's yellow, but then the yellow doesn't go all the way to the head. Instead, there's like a little black here. And so we have, once again, we have that black hair on the back of the head, which points us to Pennsylvanicus, which most people got.
And I will say on iNaturalist, you can zoom in on pictures, so they are often uploaded in their full resolution. So whereas we can't do this now, or it's a little bit harder for us to do it in the format that we're showing you, you would be able to zoom in. And this picture, if you zoom in here, it's even more clear how black that area is, and that there really isn't any yellow hair there.
And I will say, if you want to practice IDing on iNaturalist, do it on your computer. Doing it on your phone is just really difficult and not very fun. So recommend doing it on your computer. Okay.
Good job.
I'm just going to talk about this one. So this is one of those that this looks like Bombus auricomus or Pennsylvanicus. Actually, sorry, I'm gonna close this poll. But we can't get a clear shot of the head. So it's probably better to just leave this one at Bombus. There are other ways to tell. I'm not a pro at this. So ones like this, when you can't get a clear shot, that's one of those ones where you just have to kind of say, okay, we're leaving this at Bombus.
And in this one, I will say too, that T1 is kind of hard to see because it's in the shadow of the wings. So the T1 there, and this is where it really helps to see how that top yellow band is thicker than the third tergite or the second yellow stripe, right? The top one is wider because it is sort of hard to see exactly that top, the T1 is sort of hidden a little bit in the shadow of the wings.
But yeah, you're never gonna, like, not every photo is gonna be perfectly identifiable. So I'd say when in doubt, just leave it at Bumblebee, leave it at Bombus. And maybe it will get figured out by someone who knows it, and maybe it will just be a mystery. It's sometimes just hard. Okay. So we're gonna do a few more.
Before we move on,
for it.
actually, is there, because we only have like 6 more minutes. And I don't, we said it was going to be until 7. And I really do, your homework, should you choose to accept it, is to go practice on iNaturalist, and you can test yourself. Nina was talking to one of the Bumblebee experts who's on there all the time, and he's like, iNaturalist is great. It's basically a bunch of flashcards, like as many flashcards as you could possibly want for learning these species. So definitely, we highly encourage you to keep looking, keep identifying, try to identify your own. But is there any group or traits or anything that somebody just feels like, I don't have a good handle on? Because we'd like to get you a good handle before we leave today and you go to practice. So we'll leave that open for just a second.
For sure. I can also show how to like go about IDing if people haven't done it. Just a very quick iNaturalist tutorial.
Would you all be interested in that? A quick iNaturalist, how to ID on, let's do it.
Okay, let's do it. Okay, we're gonna stop share. On my iNaturalist, the easiest way to do it is go to identify, this big gosh, sorry, my cat is like scenting in my hand. Okay, go to identify. We want to do Bumblebee, so I'm just going to type in Bombus, or you can type in Bumblebees. And then let's just do it in Missouri. Oh, sorry, cat. Okay, and then press go. And then here, there's 985 that we can do. So what you can do is you can just click on one, oops, and go through the photos. This one's already been done. And then, if you agree, you can press agree. If you disagree, you can press add ID and do another one. And then you just press save and it gets saved.
You do have to have an account and be logged in order to identify.
Yeah.
So just a heads up there, you have to sign in.
So yeah, and then just as you go through them, you can, add IDs, and each photo you can kind of click on to magnify it. And then if there's multiple photos, you can click through them. But yeah, this one's only been ID'd to Bombus. Okay, does anyone know what this one is? Anyone in the chat want to say which one this is, and we can add it right now?
Click on another picture, show them another picture too.
Okay. Here's another one. That one's okay, but.
And you see how she can zoom in too. She clicks on it and she can actually zoom in on the
Yeah, I
picture.
think that one might be the best one. I don't have the chat right up, so if anyone says what it is or types it in. And this is maybe kind of be more what the quality is of a lot of the photos. Okay, someone wrote bimaculatus. That is incorrect, I will say. This is also the time of year, so this is like the only bumblebee that looks like this that's out right now. Bimaculatus and Greciacalis are done for the year. You might find a few queens. Oh yeah, we got some impatiens. Yeah, so this one's impatient. So I can add ID to say Bombus. Oops. Impatiens. Click on it. Press save, and there it is. Okay. So that's, you know, you can have unlimited practice or whatever. I recommend making sure you check back in on your IDs so that if you're making, you know, wrong IDs, like
Yeah,
you,
the only way to learn is to make mistakes, right? And to practice. So definitely go back in and you'll get little notices when people disagree with you. Nina, would you mind showing one more picture of a bee's thorax, that maybe one that's a little bit hard to see, so that I can show them how to count the tour guides?
yeah.
Somebody was asking that, or you could do it too.
Yeah, should we go to that? I mean, this is actually a pretty good one. Is that a good one for counting them, I would say?
Sure. Yeah, this is good. Okay. So I'm just going to count them and then we'll talk about how to tell them apart. So the T1, Nina, is that one? The biggest, widest one is T2. That's the next one. The one after that is the T3. And the way that you can tell from the stopping of T1 to T2 to T3 is that there's a little break in the hair, right? So we can see a little bit of the ridge of the skin underneath. The next two are kind of hard to tell, but there's a slight sort of rounding wherever you have the end of the tergite. So that one is T4. Then it's T5, and the T6 you can't see. T6 you often can't see. It's itty bitty. It's the part that has the stinger where, you know, where we sort of identify where the stinger is. And it can be really small. So the T5 is often hard to see. Or the T6, excuse me, is often hard to see. Another thing that I want to point out with this picture here, if you go all the way up to the T1, is that area that Nina was just pointing to there is actually the top of T1. So you are seeing again, the thorax and the abdomen have a hinge. Sometimes the body is open like this and you can see the top side of the integument. The teguments would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 down, coming down my arm. And so we often think of it as looking like this, where the thorax and the abdomen are lined up, but sometimes it's opened and you can actually see the top of the T1. And here we can see a little bit of that. So this will come with practice. It took a while for me to get better at it when looking at them in pictures. It's easier to do when they're physically in front of you, when you have them in 3 dimensions. So again, practice, practice, practice. There really isn't any way to learn it without doing that. So yeah, final questions, thoughts? You're very welcome, Dan. Glad you were able to make it. We will have more of these. We will send out more emails as we draw near the next one.
But yeah, thank you everyone for coming. We can stick around for a few more minutes if anyone has any questions. And yeah, we'll send out practice for you. We'll send out these slides for you and a recording later on. And yeah, go forth and kind of go through your own photos, go through other people's photos. Just you'll get familiar with them the more you kind of interact with it.